Chief Guest, Mr. Ahmed Nasir, Governor, Maldives Monetary Authority, Mr. Hassan Ziad, the Auditor General, and the officials of the Auditor General's Department, government's officials who are present here today, directors, CEOs, business leaders and senior management of the corporate sector, fellow accounting professionals. Greetings from the International Federation of Accountants, South Asian Federation of Accountants, and the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka. It is a great pleasure to be in Maldives. I've been associated with the accounting profession in Maldives through the various forums that I have got associated with. My first visit to Maldives was about 17 years ago. Since then, I have been very much associated and having my grounds there of seeing what's happening in Maldives. It's always a pleasure to be in Maldives and to come to Maldives. And I must say that in the forums that I associated with, as soon as I say that I'm associated with Maldives, people get excited. They want to come to Maldives and they're asking, why aren't we having our meetings in Maldives? So that's the potential, that's the interest the rest of the world has in Maldives. And I think there's a big role the accounting profession can play in getting Maldives to fulfill its optimum potential. And I must say that the Auditor General's Office and Auditor General is playing an immense role in filling the vacuum or the gap that may exist as a result of not having a professional accountancy organization. In short form, we call it a PAO, a professional institute. Maldives does not have a formal PAO, and I must say that the role that the Auditor General Office is playing in fulfilling that gap is great. It's a wonderful case study for any country in what the Auditor General is doing in Maldives in trying to fill that gap of non-existence of a PAO. I must say that the accounting profession is a truly global profession. You'll wonder when I say it's truly global profession why I say that. But you'll understand when I describe the institutional framework governing the accounting profession across the world and in national jurisdictions, you'll realize that it's truly a global profession. The apex agency which brings about this regulatory framework and in managing the profession as a global profession is International Federation of Accountants. It has 175 members of 130 countries, because there are countries that sometimes have more than one PAO, and therefore we have 175 PAOs, and it represents 130 countries. That's quite large, and with that comes the requirement of all these PAOs to meet certain kinds of obligations which actually regulates the profession on a global basis. In supplementing this IFAC's role, IFAC is International Federation of Accountants, we have regional organizations like the South Asian Federation of Accountants, the Confederation of Asia Pacific Accountants, to name two regional organizations that relates to this region. But you have the African Regional Organization, to the FIDEF, which is the Europe regional body. So we have regional organization that supplements IFAC's reach across the world. IFAC represents more than 3 million accountants around the world. where people they are working in public enterprises, private companies, in the academia, government, industry, and commerce. You will realize that there are countries which has PAOs and which does not have PAOs, as I said. And there are countries which has PAOs who are also, those PAOs are not IFAC members. So you have three categories. You have countries which has PAOs who are members of IFAC. There are countries which there are PAOs but who are not members of IFAC. And there are countries which does not have PAOs. In fact, Maldives is categorized as at present, if you really go to the IFAC website, as a country which has a PAO but is not a member of IFAC. I think there was a forum association called CPA. We see some of the officials here. That possibly is the status as it IFAC realizes, possibly last updated about 2-3 years ago. So I believe I heard the Auditor General and the Governor all alluding to the fact that we will see a PAO, active PAO legislated with authority that will get established in Maldives very soon, which is very heartening news for all of us. Now, how does the profession get regulated across the globe in a consistent, standard way? As I said, there are 130 countries who are governed by IFAC through its PAOs, and each of them are expected to fulfill what we call Statement of Member Obligations. Statement of Member Obligations, short form, we call it SMOs. There are 7 SMOs that each PAO who is a member of IFAC has to fulfill. And these SMOs goes like this. SMO 1 is on quality assurance, which means that the PAO who is a member of IFAC has to meet the requirements of IFAC of quality assurance of their members and auditors. And they have to have in place processes which establishes that. SMO 2 is international education standards. If they are offering a qualification, they're supposed to follow international education standards, which is a fairly long list of standards, and the qualification has to meet the criteria of SMO 2, which is international education standards. SMO 3 is international standards on auditing. So they have to adapt and practice, implement, practice international auditing standards. And that's a requirement. SMO 4 is International Code of Ethics. You have to adopt the Code of Ethics. The best practice Code of Ethics is given by IFAC, and generally all the POs are expected to adopt that. If for local risk circumstances there is need for slight tweaking, that's allowed, but generally the Code of Ethics of IFAC is adopted by the local PAOs. Then we have SMO 5, International Public Sector Accounting Standard, IPSAS for short form. So the PAOs has to ensure they adopt IPSAS, the members meet with the IPSAS standards, and they are implemented through the PAO in the country. SMO 6 is investigation and discipline. We heard about the Code of Ethics. Code of Ethics is not good enough. You have to have a process in place to do the investigation and discipline in relation to violations of Code of Ethics. SMO 7 is International Financial Reporting Standards. So that's about the IFRS, adopting and implementing IFRS. So if you really see, if you talk about these 7 SMOs, these established standards across the world, which is standards, international standards, which has to get applied consistently across the world, and it to some extent builds capacity through the international education standards that are being enforced. So that's the process in which the entire regulatory framework of the accounting profession operates. So you will realize that the standards in jurisdictions are similar, consistent. The professional accountants that get produced are of similar capacity. If these are adopted and implemented effectively, then you must have standards across the world which are all same. You will have accountants who have the same capacity, technical capability across the world, and has the ability to deal with violations on code of ethics, and so on and so forth. So that's a unique, I don't think any other profession in the world has that amount of consistency. But the problem is, we adopt, for example, we have Maldives adopting IFRS. To what extent is it consistent in its application in Maldives as compared to some other country? So the adoption takes place, but the issue is, will the people in the country have capacity to implement this in a consistent way? And is it being monitored to ensure application is consistent and uniform as expected from any other jurisdiction? So this is the role that the PAO, I said Professional Institute, has to play to ensure capacity is built in the national jurisdiction, and they are consistently applied and monitored, and if there are violations, there is a process to make sure that those are rectified. And that's the core function and mandate of a PAO. And I'm happy to see the Auditor General mentioning he has established an accounting and auditing assurance and Accounting and Assurance Institute for training, capacity building. We also heard from him saying they do have a quality monitoring unit in Auditor General Department. These are processes that should reside in a PAO. Due to lack of a PAO, Auditor General has taken on that mandate, which is fantastic. So, but we all must agree, Auditor General has his own mandate to fulfill and cannot get too distracted by building a profession in a country, and for that reason, this country needs a PAO. And I believe that commitment we heard from both the Auditor General and the Governor, and I'm happy to know that it may be a reality very soon. So, just to give you a sort of a feel for what's the level of application of international reporting standards and auditing standards across the jurisdictions. There are around 135 countries across the world who has adopted IFRS, and those are the standards in those countries, and the ISAs, International Standards on Auditing. So that's a very significant number. The challenge that IFAC has is to ensure there is consistent application of these standards across all jurisdictions. And it is a role that IFAC has taken to ensure the capacity is built in the PAOs who are their members, to ensure that there is consistent application of these standards and there is capacity. And the committee that I chair, which is called Professional Accountancy Development Committee, is the committee that overlooks and has an oversight over the role of IFAC to ensure there is capacity build across PAOs to ensure that they fulfill this mandate in relation to these 7 SMOs we spoke about. As I know, Maldives requires IFRS is adopted by Maldives through various legislations. And what I was asking yesterday, is there a law that specifies that a company must adopt IFRS? I was not sure whether I got sort of a good answer to that, but by practice, clearly, it is being fulfilled. But if there are violations, is there a law that deals with it? and so on and so forth. Well, I have not studied too much, but I think it may be in place. But is it consistent across all sectors? I'm sure banking industry may be practicing it very consistently because the Maldives Monetary Authority may be enforcing it. So you may have situations of that nature, but there should be one legislation that will govern this and says this country will adopt IFRS, or for that matter, Maldivian accounting standards, which can be accounting standards derived from IFRS. IFAC will want, if it's a PAO, the PAO in Maldives is adopting IFRS, and they call it Maldivian accounting standards, that's acceptable, provided that the gap between IFRS and the Maldivian accounting standard is too much. Because in Sri Lanka also we have Sri Lanka financial reporting standards, which is actually almost one-to-one with IFRS, but gives us the ability to be able to tweak the standard to suit the country. So that ability is there. We also have the harmonization of curriculums across the world. We have a common content curriculum project that's happening in Europe at this moment. In the African region, we have a fairly significant number of jurisdictions in Africa, East Africa as one grouping, West Africa as another grouping, working on a common curriculum for their PAOs. Because you have the international education standards, which has to be fulfilled by the PAOs, and so it's easy if countries start adopting common curriculum, which can then have a situation where you recognize the accountants across jurisdictions because the curriculums are very similar. For all purposes, even though there is no common curricula, through international education standards, we have a fairly consistent application or consistent similarity in curriculums. And that's why in Maldives, you recognize ACCAs to CIMAs to CA Sri Lanka accountants here, because these curriculums have become consistent across jurisdictions over a period of time. Also, but of course, when you set up your PAO, the issue is, are you going to have your own curriculum, and are you going to have your own exams and produce chartered accountants or accountants of Maldives? That's the question. Now, some countries have the issue of scale. You know, if you don't have a good market size that attracts a good number of accountants, you'll find that sometimes it's not feasible for you to run exams of your own, because not only exams, you need to have training institutes, you have to have education institutes. Now, that's a challenge that you will may face given the scale and the numbers you have. But there are alternatives to this. You know, you have situations like accrediting universities, university or universities that you have to do the base content. And you, on top of that, give 2 or 3 papers that you really want to make sure they become a professional accountant. So accredited universities to run that, and they are geared for that. You also have scenarios where in in African continent, people adopting international PAOs exams in their own country. We have in Namibia. Namibia exams are actually South African Institute's exams, but branded as Namibian Institute exams, but the same exam. And there is understanding between South African Institute and Namibia to do that. We have in another country, the ACCA qualification is actually in Mauritius, if I'm not mistaken. It's the ACCA qualification that's given out. The exams are ACCA exams, and you run it as Mauritius Institute exams, and then you qualify them. And you can tweak the papers the way you want if there is a requirement for that. Or if not, you just recognize other accounting qualifications, and you don't have your own exams, and you actually have your own PAO members based on qualifications issued by other PAOs. So these are alternatives which you will start thinking of as you set up your PAO. In this context, I want to, given the context of you are going to just set up a PAO, I just want to run very quickly 2 case studies, which I thought was very relevant for Maldives. One is Botswana. Botswana had their first act legislation in 1988, which actually created the Botswana Institute of Accountants, or Institute of Botswana Accountants, or Botswana Institute of Accountants. And it just said that it will recognize all the qualifications of IFAC member bodies to give membership of that institute. So that, I think, is a similar situation in Maldives. You have foreign accountants working here. So Botswana has many foreign accountants. So the first set of accountants in Botswana who registered and got membership of Botswana Institute of Accountants was about 250. And out of the 250, 200 were foreign qualified foreign expatriates who were having work permits in Botswana. And there were about 50 indigenous accountants who got membership. This went on for a long time, and they went up to over 1,000 members. And in 2010, they replaced this act with the Botswana Institute of Chartered Accountants Act, which enabled them to conduct exams. So they are conducting exams now by themselves, in addition to recognizing the professional accountants of other bodies. And their first set of chartered accountants passed out a year ago, and they have 7 of them. So they have their own 7 chartered accountants that's qualified very recently, and they are now, the total membership strength of Botswana Institute of Chartered Accountants is about 2,000 plus. The indigenous people, the Botswanian people as members is about 40% from an earlier 250-50 ratio. Now it has gone to about 40%, and they are producing their own chartered accountants. So I thought that was a very useful case study, and if you do want to talk to them, I'm sure you can get in touch with them and learn more about that. I think it's important to also understand how Sri Lanka progressed, because I thought that also is a good case study. Sri Lanka started in 1961, if I'm not mistaken, and it was similar, like in Maldives. The Auditor General decided to set up the PAO, and he sponsored the legislation, and he got the legislation out, and the first office of the Institute of Chartered Accountants was in the Auditor General's office. They had a room there, and they started their operations at the Auditor General's office. And the first members of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka was Sri Lankans who were qualified by ICAEW. At those days, we were a colony of Britain, and people were doing ICAEW exams. And we had 7 members who had qualified from ICAEW, and they got membership of the Institute of Chartered Accountants. That's how we started. We started exams, immediately after that, and then since then we are 5,000 plus members. So that's another case study sort of you have in terms of starting your own PAO. Okay. So why, I just want to make the case again in terms of the profession and its contribution to nation building. I think we've taken the profession taken for granted that the amount of contribution that the accounting profession makes to nation building. It has been proven, and IFAC is in the process of putting out a publication which shows a strong correlation between a strong accounting profession and the progress and development of a country. It has been taken for granted because the real commercial base for enterprises, for the country, actually comes out of the accounting education, professional accounting education, which we've not realized. And I must say that that has been realized, and that's been focused on now. And we're doing research in IFAC to show in terms of quantitative terms that correlation, whilst we have conceptually established and is convinced that's the case. When a PAO functions very effectively in a country, you will realize that they're supposed to act in the public interest. It is not only providing professional accountancy services for enterprises. Public and general society relies on accountants and auditors to look after the interest, their own interests and public interest. And it is supposed it has its independent status, and that's been jealously safeguarded by a lot of POs across the world. And acting in public interest becomes also very important mandate. It develops and produces capable and competent accountancy professionals, very, very key. And it markets the profession in the country and create a talent pool, attracting a talent pool for producing accountants. It promotes and enforces strong professional and ethical standards. Sometimes profession, even though it exists, if you don't monitor and enforce the ethical standards, it can have a very negative effect on the profession. And therefore, it is very important that the strong professional and ethical standards are maintained. And I must say that comes out of the Code of Ethics of a PAO. In any violations of Code of Ethics that the public sees can be reported to the Professional Institute, and the Professional Institute will investigate and take action and suspend membership. And you don't have to do any other regulatory body that does not need to get intervened if the PO is acting very, very effectively. Further, the quality of financial management reporting is clearly will increase, and there will be capacity building that takes place, and the PO will act as a regulator, as a self-regulator, will support government and will be a resource to government and other stakeholders. Now, a robust and a well-functioning accountancy profession composed of competent and capable professional accountants supported by a strong PAO will contribute significantly to sustainability of small and medium and large businesses. I will talk a little bit about SMPs and SMEs. It will add to the capital markets growth and development. It will actually be a stewardship for public financial management and delivery of public service, and ultimately for economic growth and development. Right. So, if there's a strong PAO, which mandate has been very well fulfilled at this moment by the Auditor General, there are segments of accountants that you have to support. And one category is the small and medium practitioners. Now, another category is the professional accountants in business, the accountants working in industry and commerce, and then the public sector. I just want to very quickly, I think I have about 5 to 7 minutes more, very quickly address some of the initiatives that possibly needs to be considered in the context of Maldives in relation to these three segments. Now, when you talk about the SMPs, I think a very significant percentage of professional accountants in Maldives works in SMEs and practice as small and medium practitioners. Now, I must say, clearly the IFRS standards and the IFRS SME standard, which is a standard for small and medium enterprises, is still too complex for SMEs. It's complex. I must tell you, it is too complex for we accountants as well. When I studied and qualified, I had only 6 standards, and I knew the 6 standards by heart. I knew all the standards. Now we have 40 plus standards, and you will never be able to know each standard well. In fact, now in our firms, we specialize in standards. Like the doctors specializing in various parts of the body, we specialize now in standards. So if a partner is serving a client and he has a challenge in a particular standard, he'll go to a specialist who knows the standard very well and ask, what's the solution to this? So that's the level to which has gone, which actually makes it very challenging for small and medium practitioners and small and medium enterprises. So we in Sri Lanka actually created an indigenous standard, accounting standard for micro enterprises, which actually takes out all the fair value treatment in the IFRS. So there is no fair value. Actually, why the standards have got so complex is because we are bringing about the fair value treatments to our balance sheet items. It's about what's the market values, what's the future market values. This is all driven by investors. It is not by anyone else. It's driven by investors. And therefore, it has become very complex. So we actually brought in effective 1st January 2016, accounting standard for micro enterprises, which forms part of the accounting standards of Sri Lanka. And this standard is a very easy standard. It goes back to historical cost, and actually values all balance sheet items based on historical cost. And it's accounting that we are all accustomed to. Of we do transactions and we account for it, and we have a P&L and a balance sheet. So we've got to that, and I feel that's a route that you may want to look at. The thresholds for the small micro enterprise accounting standard Sri Lanka is any company which has which doesn't have more than 100 million rupees. I think it's 650,000 US. If it's less than that, and your equity has to be less than 50 million, which is 325,000 US. If you fulfill these two criteria, you can add up the accounting standard for micro enterprises, which makes your auditing so easy, which makes your accounting so easy for small and medium enterprises. One of the challenges we have had in Sri Lanka is actually getting SMEs to understand the value proposition of accounts. They don't, if you have a set of accounts, your decision making is so much greater. There's value the accounts will bring for your decision making. You'll manage your working capital better. You'll do your pricing better because you will know your cost very well, and so on and so forth. But of course, tax isn't always an issue. People don't want to do accounts because thinking that they'll get caught to the Inland Revenue Authority. That's something that we have to educate. You pay your taxes as well and make good decisions and grow your business. So that's the value proposition the PAO in Sri Lanka is advocating very aggressively, and I can tell you it's gathering momentum. Our SMPs also has the ability to serve clients. As I said, the SMPs has a good base to advise clients on business proposition. So we as a PAO in Sri Lanka has developed 3 tools. One is a business planning tool, which actually SMP can use in supporting a SME to do a business plan. A financial feasibility tool to do a feasibility study in buying a machine or going in for a new project. And we also have done a tool to actually help them to assist SMEs in submitting proposals to financial institutions for credit. Those are 2 things that I thought I must mention here, because I'm sure Maldives also must be a challenge to manage SMPs and SMEs. So that's an area. Very quickly on professional accountants in business. I must say they need to get supported very well as things are moving now. You will realize with the debacles we had on Enron and all these debacles we've had, we started by having CEO and the CFO signing balance sheets. They have to authenticate the figures. You have to ensure there are controls. SOX 404 came in, and the latest you have is NOCLA, non-compliance with rules and regulations. If you're an accountant, whether you're an auditor or an accountant in business, if you know the entity is not complying with any laws or regulation that they are supposed to comply, you're supposed to report to the regulator. Now that's a big challenge. And we are not very happy of that, because we want to build relationship with the management. We don't want to be seen policemen and controlling. But we play a public interest role, and it's as a result of that this has come. We PAOs in various countries are now putting in place processes to manage this, make sure that our relationship with clients and management doesn't break down. But also at the same time, you need to have whistleblowing provisions enshrined, safeguards for whistleblowing provision enshrined in legislations. Because let's say a CFO blows a whistle, and he'll be out of job next day. Now that should not happen. That should not happen. So these are the issues that are coming up. A PAO will double with those issues and put in place processes. We also have the concept of financial reporting supply chain. Financial reporting supply chain means it is not only the accountant who is in the supply chain. You have the preparer, who is the accountant. You have the external auditor. You have the regulator, accounting regulator. You have the credit rating agencies. You have the investors, and you have ultimately the public. So this entire gamut of supply, we call it supply, financial reporting supply chain, has to be well coordinated and managed for effective financial reporting. And that's the reason sometimes we really need underpinning regulation and a strong institutional setup to manage this entire gamut. People must coordinate with each other. The auditors must work in hand with the preparer. The credit rating agencies also needs to be completely, should not get not aligned with what's happening, and so on and so forth. So this underpinning regulations and institutional framework is very critical for a strong profession and for financial reporting in a country. PAIB, we call it PAIB, Professional Accounting Business, has much more elements, but I don't want to get too much into that given the time constraint. But I just want to jump into public sector. Now, the public sector is a sector that generally gets overlooked by a lot of the PAOs. And IFAC, as an international body, has focused on this now very much and ensures that PAOs, or the professional institutes, focus on public sector. Now, the challenges that the public sector has is, first of all, a lot of the governments, a lot of the developed governments, countries, we heard about Spain going bust because a contingent liability was never, not a contingent liability, a liability was never disclosed in the balance sheet. That is because there was no proper accrual accounting. You don't accrue, not public nor anyone, even the government does not know what is the total assets they have, what is the total liabilities they have, because it doesn't get accounted properly because we don't do accrual accounting. Now, one of the fundamental requirements from the profession is that governments have to get into accrual accounting, and we heard today from the governor the statement on that. We must make sure all of us get to that. Because how do we know a country has progressed if you don't have a balance sheet? What was their net worth at one point? What is their net worth at the next point? And that's how we assess the growth and development of companies. But governments will still keep on talking, but we'll never know whether progress has been made or not. So I think it's very important to get into accrual accounting, and it enriches decision making a hell of a lot for governments to make right decisions. So I think the first fundamental requirement is to governments to get into accrual accounting and adopt IPSAS, International Public Sector Accounting Standards. And in order to get to that, I think the professional institutes and the Audit General has a mandate to handhold the government to create capacity to do this. Now, that's about professionalizing the accounting community in the public sector. They may be professional accountants of the institute or the PAO, or they may not be. They may be government accounting service personnel who may not have professional qualification. They may be people who are degree holders who have got into government accounting service, may not have the best capacity to actually serve the needs of the government to get into accrual accounting. So there is a need for PAOs and the Auditor General to professionalize the government accounting service to make sure that there is capacity to build on the requirements that is required for governments to get into proper accounting, transparency, accountability, and governance. I just want to get back, if you don't mind, to public sector accounting, professional accountants in business. One of the things that the PAOs must get involved in is creating a proper governance code for commercial enterprise to operate. The Institute in Sri Lanka has prepared a best practice corporate governance code, which actually, again, strengthens the financial reporting supply chain. One of the people in this financial reporting supply chain is the people who sit in governance in the commercial enterprise. Now, if you don't prepare a proper conducive environment for an accountant and the CEO to work in a proper the governance is not good, I can tell you transparency, accountability, financial reporting will suffer. So I think there is a role for the professional accountants and professional PAOs to actually get into the aspect of governance, corporate governance as well. So I think these are a few of my messages. I hope it was very useful. And from an IFAC perspective, And from a IFAC perspective, plus from a regional perspective, we are all very, very supportive of Maldives. And the day that PAO gets established and we have them becoming members of the regional organization and IFAC, it will be a great milestone, as the Auditor General mentioned, in the history of the profession in Maldives. And I hope that we'll dawn in this country very soon, and we'll be able to be associated with that milestone as well. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this forum. I was very happy when I was invited because of the involvement I've had in the past. And I wish all of you very useful and productive knowledge sessions during the day and the next 2 days. Thank you very much.